with Maria and welcome to SG Global News. From the restoration of the annual solemn mass at the altar of the chair in St. Peter's Basilica and even suspended for 2 years to the South Korean government's request to Pope Leo to promote peace in the Korean peninsula, we have many stories to cover. During the second day of the Summorum Pontificum pilgrimage, Cardinal Burke celebrated a solemn pontifical mass at the altar of the chair inside St. Peter's Basilica. This special High Latin Mass, which gathered hundreds of devotees of the ancient liturgy, marked the return of an annual custom that had been suspended since 2022. On October 25th, Cardinal Burke celebrated a special traditional Latin Mass for hundreds of pilgrims in St. Peter's Basilica, returned to a prior custom of an annual pilgrimage of Catholics devoted to the ancient liturgy suspended since 2022. Cardinal Burke celebrated Pontifical Mass at the altar of the chair on the second day of the Summorum Pontificum pilgrimage. The Cardinal also celebrated the Latin Mass at the altar of the chair for the pilgrimage in 2014. The Mass was preceded by a half-mile procession that moved from the Basilica of St. Celso and Giuliano to St. Peter's Basilica. According to the pilgrimage's website, the event was part of the 14th annual Summorum Pontificum pilgrimage, which brings faithful to the See of Peter to demonstrate their strong attachment to the traditional liturgy. The pilgrimage began on the evening of October 24th with Vespers in Rome's Basilica of San Lorenzo in Lucina, preceded over by Cardinal Matteo Subi. A solemn closing Mass of the Christ the King was celebrated at the Church of Santissima Trinita del Pellegrini on the final day of the pilgrimage. However, in 2023 and 2024, the pilgrimage was not able to receive authorization from the Basilica's liturgy office. The traditional Latin Mass website Rorate Celli saw the celebration of a solemn pontifical Mass in the St. Peter's Basilica as an important sign of increased acceptance for the traditional liturgy. Urging the new papal representative to Iraq to foster hope and peace, Pope Leo XIV presided over the Mass and Episcopal ordination of Monsignor Miroslav Stanislaw Wachowski on October 26 in St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope stressed that a nuncio represents a church that accompanies, consoles, and builds bridges, not one that defends interests but serves communion. Pope Leo XIV presided over the Mass with the Episcopal ordination of Monsignor Miroslav Stanislaw Wachowski, the new papal representative to Iraq, on October 26 in St. Peter's Basilica. The Holy Father urged Monsignor Wachowski to safeguard the sprouts of hope and encourage peaceful coexistence, reminding him that Vatican diplomacy is born of the gospel and nourished by prayer in Iraq. Born in Pis, Poland in 1970, Archbishop Wachowski was ordained in 1996. He joined Vatican diplomacy in 2004 and rose to the position of Undersecretary for Relations with States in 2019. The Pope highlighted that Iraq is a land marked by suffering and the desire for rebirth, yet rich in ancient Christian faith that couldn't be extinguished by violence. The Pope described Archbishop Wachowski's motto, Gloria Deo Pax Omnibus, roughly translated as Program for Life, as a blueprint for realizing God's glory through peace. In this context, he stressed that humility is a bishop's essential trait, exemplified by the tax collector in the Gospel who acknowledged his sins. This humility, the Pope noted, is rooted in the pastor's recognition that he is a servant, not a boss. Taking in account of the Archbishop's rural roots, Pope Leo XIV compared the bishop's role to that of a farmer, to sow with patience, cultivate with respect, and wait with hope. He added that a bishop is a guardian, not an honor, a man of prayer, not possession. The pontiff stressed that a nuncio represents a church that accompanies, consoles, and builds bridges, not the one that defends interests but serves communion. The Pope concluded by advising the nuncio that in Iraq, his influence would be determined not by his speech but by the love he demonstrates. He formally entrusted the mission to the intercession of Mary, Queen of Peace, and the saints of Mesopotamia. International governments are being urged to tackle religious oppression and safeguard Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by Bishop John Buchaney of Maiduguri Diocese and Aid to the Church in Need. The bishop, who told MPs they cannot remain silent against persecution, witnessed the rapid momentum of the joint petition, which was signed by nearly 1,000 people within its inaugural hour. A Nigerian bishop has told the MPs in the UK that they cannot remain silent in the face of persecutions as nearly 1,000 people signed a petition within its first hour calling for international governments to tackle religious oppression. Bishop John Buchaney of the Maiduguri Diocese, in collaboration with Aid to the Church in Need, has urged international governments to protect Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They launched this petition at a parliamentary event hosted by Brendan O'Hara MP just before ASEAN released its most recent Religious Freedom in the World report. Speaking about escalating crisis, Bishop Buchaney declared that they cannot remain silent when persecution is occurring. He described the intensifying violence in Nigeria, highlighting that Christian communities have been severely impacted, with militants often targeting churches first. The bishop pointed out that while the conflict has broader roots, dismissing the religious dimension would be an oversimplification, particularly given the systemic, seemingly unpunished attacks on priests, churches, and other symbols of Christianity. The petition urges governments to defend religious liberty, provide support for at-risk faith communities, and offer emergency and legal aid to individuals suffering due to their beliefs. Dr. Carolyn Hull, National Director for ASEAN UK, emphasized this effort, stating that religious freedom is a human right, the right to believe what we choose without harming ourselves or others, and to practice that faith without fear, whether in public or private. Although the right to religious freedom is guaranteed under Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the speaker lamented the daily failure across the globe to uphold this standard. This inaction, they pointed out, is found among numerous groups including political and religious leaders, social media influencers, educators, local politicians, and leaders of villages and families. President Donald Trump on October 24th indicated that he would ask Chinese President Xi Jinping about the possible release of long-imprisoned Catholic activist Jimmy Lai, suggesting he may bring pressure on the communist country's leadership to allow Lai to walk free ahead of his likely conviction in the national security trial.
President Donald Trump has signaled that he would ask the Chinese president to release the unjustly imprisoned Catholic pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai. In response to an EWTN correspondent's question on October the 24th, Trump stated that the issue was on his list and expressed optimism despite the hostility between the Chinese government and Lai. Trump is scheduled to meet Xi Jinping next week. More than 30 bipartisan senators, including U.S. Senator Jimmy Risch, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Senator Rick Scott, had urged President Trump in an open letter to advocate for the release of Jimmy Lai, whose health was deteriorating in the harsh prison conditions. Highlighting the urgency of his plight, the senators wrote that after almost 5 years in solitary confinement, Lai's trial under Hong Kong's national security law was coming to an end. The humanitarian case for Mr. Lai's release is stronger and more dire than ever, which is why this must be addressed at the highest possible level, emphasized the lawmakers. Jimmy Lai, the founder of the pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily and a human rights activist, was arrested in 2020 for allegations of colluding with foreign forces under a controversial national security law put in effect by the Chinese government. Now 78-year-old Jimmy Lai is even denied medical care despite suffering from diabetes and numerous physical ailments.
South Korea's government has called on Pope Leo XIV to visit North Korea to help promote peace on the Korean peninsula, according to local media. The request was made by South Korean National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-shik, who met with the Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin on October 21st and handed him a letter for the Pope.
South Korean lawmakers have urged Pope Leo XIV to visit North Korea during his trip to the Korean peninsula for the 2027 Seoul World Youth Day. UK News reported that during the visit to the Vatican to discuss measures for the successful hosting of the WYD, the lawmakers presented a formal letter with the request to Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State of the Holy See. Following the meeting on October the 21st, South Korean National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-shik said, if the Pope's visit to North Korea is realized during his trip to Seoul, it would be a very significant symbol for world peace and peace on the Korean peninsula. Park Ji-young of the Democratic Party of Korea suggested that the closing mass of Seoul WYD be held at the demilitarized zone between the two nations to foster peace. In July this year, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung had proposed that Pope Leo consider a visit to North Korea. Since his election, Lee's administration has been de-escalating tensions with North Korea by suspending loudspeaker broadcasts and leaflet campaigns. In response, North Korea also stopped its broadcasts to the south. Former South Korean President Moon Jae-in visited the Vatican and invited then Pope Francis to visit North Korea. Pope Francis had responded that he would go if an official invitation came from the north.
That's all for today. Until we meet again, God bless and thank you.